Welcome to A Better Divorce podcast, where we have conversations about the emotional, financial, and legal issues that are on your mind or should be on your radar if your goal is to keep your divorce out of court. I'm collaborative divorce attorney and mediator Andrea Vacca, and I know that how you divorce matters to your long-term well-being. That's why it's my mission to help you have a better divorce with as little acrimony as possible, so that you can create the best life possible on the other side of your marriage. Hello, I'm Andrea Vacca, and I'm very happy to welcome Emily Malloy to the podcast today. Emily is an attorney and social worker who practices primarily as a parent and divorce coach and as a family mediator. She focuses on supporting parents in their relationships with their children so that they can make the best decisions possible in their divorce process and beyond. And she's also the divorced co-parent of 2 teenagers, and one of them identifies as transgender. So, Emily, I'm thrilled to have you here to discuss this issue today of how divorcing or divorced parents can best help their transgender or gender diverse children.
Thank you so much for having me, Andrea. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, I really am great. I'm glad you're here because, there's so much talk about, especially right now in the news in the world, about transgender children. And at the same time, I suspect, and I know you probably know, that most parents don't know much about it at all. So when a child comes to them and announces that they are identifying in a different way, gender-wise, it's probably very surprising. And all they have is the certain news sources that they've been listening to. And so I would like to start with the basics. So what does it mean to be transgender or gender diverse?
Yeah, thank you. And I love that you started with that. It's a challenging time to be a parent of a transgender child. And starting just with the basics. So what it is to be transgender, it simply means that a person's gender identity is different from the sex they were assigned at birth. And gender diverse is a broader term because transgender tends to, and we talk about gender as a binary is what a lot of people understand, right? You're born and the doctor says it's a boy or it's a girl. And for a lot of people, that's kind of the end of the story. And it really, okay, you're a boy, so this shapes how you're expected to be addressed and how you're expected to show up and move through the world. And so a lot of people are coming to this issue with that just basic understanding. But what gender identity is it's a core part of who someone is, of their identity. It's something that, as we've learned, and as mainstream medical and mental health professionals understand now, it is something that cannot be controlled or changed, but it can be discovered. And that discovery process primarily happens in adolescence. It begins in early childhood, but really in adolescence is when a young person is learning and understanding this part of themselves. And when they come to their parents, they're really looking for, support. I mean, first of all, as a parent, and I will say, I love how you said a lot of people aren't familiar. When I meet a lot of people for the first time, their child has just come out and they don't know anything and they're really confused. And as you said, they've been listening to what's going on in the national conversation, which has elements that aren't grounded in what mainstream science is, honestly. So it can be a very confusing and scary time, but just remembering your child is, if they've come to you, they're in distress and chances are they've been feeling this way for a long time. So remembering that, and they're coming to you as a parent for support, for guidance, and they want to know that you love them. And I'll just finish with this, the biggest fear they have, and what I always try to help parents hold in mind, is they're afraid they'll be rejected. And so really having that compassion and empathy for what your child is going through and the fact that you're lucky that they came to you with this information is really important to hold. And then remembering, that you may have your own questions and your own doubts and concerns, and all of that's okay. And we could talk about, parents can explore those separately from their children. But I do want to say, when someone comes to me, I expect a lot of questions and doubts. And and what do I do? So that's perfectly okay. And I just want to make that clear too.
Sure. Well, I know your child came out as transgender after your divorce.
Mhm.
So, what did you learn from your own experiences? You started sharing a little bit about this, but what more should somebody know from somebody who's been there, how to best support their child? Of course, understanding they're probably scared to tell you, they've been wondering how to do it, they've been feeling this way for a long time. They're they're scared, but they also need your support. What else, what else should somebody know if they're in this situation or suspect that they may be in this situation?
Yeah, it's a great question. And for me, I did get a little bit of an inkling ahead of time. So I was expecting it at some point. So that helped, but yeah, it can be a parent can feel very caught off guard. And one of the things to do, and the first thing I want to say is all parents make mistakes in this. It's very hard not to, because again, we don't have a lot of lived experience or context for this conversation. So know that you're going to make mistakes and it's okay. So even if you don't handle the first conversation very well, there's always an opportunity to go back and do what I call repair. So, and that when I'm working with people, we talk about what happened and how can we repair. So I want to put that out there too. And because a lot of times people haven't even sought information until after this conversation has already happened. But really, so what I recommend is really reiterate, saying to your child supportive language, and I love you is a good thing to start. If you don't know much about it, as many people don't, saying I want to understand and I want to learn from you what this is, how you're feeling, what your experiences are. I say listen to understand. This isn't the time to ask questions or say, wow, are you sure? Or, you didn't come out when you were very young. A common misconception a lot of people have is that if a child didn't identify as the gender, as another gender from what they were assigned at birth, as a young person, then it means that if they come out as an adolescent, it's a phase or it's not real. And that's not true. So any questions or comments like that, it's okay to have them, keep them to yourself. There's a lot of parent support groups and coaches and therapists and places you can go to ask those questions and be with other parents who can support you and who are feeling the way you are too and have a lot of questions. So really just listening to understand, being willing to support your child on, and what I mean by that is walk alongside your child on their own journey. And I think it's helpful to think about journeys. So the child is having their journey to understand their gender identity. And for each of the parents, they're on their own journey too, because again, for a lot of us, it's new. It's not what we learned. And so we have our own process to understand and do our work of understanding what it means. It's just really important to keep that separate from the conversations you're having with your child, because, and I can provide a link to this, but there has been research on what kind of behaviors parents tend to have when their child comes out as either gay or transgender. And they've identified certain ones that are helpful and some that are harmful. And even unintentionally asking a question or saying, well, I don't know about that, can really feel rejecting to your child. And that's, the last thing that parents who love their children really want to do. So.
Right. Yes, please share that link. We'll get that. We'll put that in the show notes. So, standing, next to your child or, beside your child, kind of following their lead as to how they want to be called and, how they want to be referred to, what gender, what name, how, anything you can share about that or how you handled that or what you've seen other best practices are, because it's not a set in stone. Like I am now this person. They're saying I have feelings. I think this. I've tried this out. I mean, they're confused. You're confused. How do you stand beside somebody who's a young child, a child still and figure this out?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I remember, so I could share it in my case too. So our child came out and said she wanted to use a chosen name and female pronouns, but my ex-husband and I were not allowed to use that name and those pronouns. She wasn't ready for that yet. So she came out in a very selective way. And so I guess part of what the best practice is with respect to chosen name and pronouns and how the child wants to express themselves, letting them explore and do that and really following their lead. So like I said, my child was at a program for children with anxiety for a period of time. And she came out there and everyone there was allowed to call her new chosen name and pronouns, but not us. And then, it's just kind of a funny story that I've shared with people that when she finished that program, I went to pick her up and the last day we had the last family therapy meeting. And she said, Mom, Dad, okay, you can start calling me by my chosen name and pronouns. And so this was December. I was driving her home and I suddenly realized I had put up all the Christmas decorations with her old name on her stocking and on, her given name. And so we talked, I said, and this is an example of repair. I said, you know what? I just realized I made a mistake. I did all of this. I put up your stocking with your given name and all these ornaments. And there are pictures, things that I didn't think about ahead of time. And I said, I'm really sorry. I will, I'll get a new stocking. How do you feel about pictures? How do you feel about the ornaments? And she was okay with it, but it was helpful that I acknowledged that I hadn't thought about it and made a mistake and I didn't mean to, so best practices is really following your child's lead on all of those things. And in terms of the family and friends, some children want to come out to everyone right away and some don't. So I really recommend following their lead on that. And to the extent you're going to be seeing family, for example, I think of paving the way for your child, if whatever makes your child the most comfortable. So if I know we're going to see family we haven't seen in a while and they are learning for the first time that my child is transgender, or my child makes the decision, I'm not ready for that. I'm going to go use my given name and I'm going to express myself in the sex consistent with the sex I was assigned at birth. Follow their lead on that. And if they want a conversation, if it's helpful to them to have a conversation with the family members ahead of time, that could be really helpful and ease some of your child's discomfort in stepping into that situation.
It just sounds like there's so much there. It's walking a tightrope and you might fall off and you're going to have to get back on and you have to figure this out. I mean, the whole family is really trying to figure this out together, and every situation might bring up a different way of reacting and being. So, giving yourself grace is what I'm hearing you say, to make mistakes, to not say the right thing, to not know what to do at a given time. Your child, I assume, will start, if you give yourself grace, your child will do the same. Mm-hmm. What do you have to say to somebody who now has to give grace to their spouse or their soon to be ex-spouse or ex-husband or wife, or like, how do you accept where they are? They can be in a very different place. How did you and your ex-husband handle this? Any guidance for others in that way?
Yeah. And it's a great question. And I do think just as you having grace with yourself, and that's why I always start with the conversation of this is very new for a lot of people and there's a huge learning curve. So remembering that, keeping that in mind with your soon to be ex-spouse, spouse, or ex-spouse, keeping that in mind. And I truly believe people can learn new things. And while in the context of our national conversation, having your own child who identifies as transgender is certainly an incentive to learn more about what it means, and to, parents love their children and want to support their relationship with their child, and a lot of people don't know how and need some space and grace to learn. So what I always encourage is anything that you can do to support the relationship between your child and your ex-spouse or soon to be ex-spouse. giving them the space to learn, remembering. This is another thing that happens a lot with someone who's farther along on the learning curve, can forget where they started, and sometimes like even I pull back and like, it took me a while to learn all of this. And how I feel now is certainly, it's been a journey for me too. And I had to learn a lot and get a lot of information, and remembering your spouse will need to do that too. And hopefully they can. And we can talk about the situation where maybe there's an affirming parent and one isn't, and what do you do then? And also,
I didn't catch the word. You said maybe there's a certain kind of parent,
a non-affirming parent.
Non-affirming parent. Okay. Yes, there might be one who just never gets up to speed, doesn't come around, and you're going to have to deal with that. But there's also that natural one person's ahead, maybe had more information, had the inkling, and the other one's like needs time to adapt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're going to take a 10-second break here. Hey listeners, it's Andrea Vacca here, your host of a Better Divorce podcast. If you're looking for ways to navigate your divorce with less conflict and more cooperation, my free ebook, Divorce Without Court, A More Peaceful Solution, can help you do just that. Divorce Without Court shows you how to reach an agreement without court involvement, from understanding mediation and collaborative divorce to learning how to keep your divorce under your control. This book covers it all. You'll even find practical checklists and first steps to help you move forward and guide you through the process. With over 3 decades of experience in family law, I've helped countless couples and families achieve peaceful solutions. Divorce Without Court puts that knowledge in your hands. Whether you're just starting to think about ending your marriage or if you're already in the process, this free ebook will help you have a better divorce. Why wait? Click the link in the episode description to download Divorce Without Court, A More Peaceful Solution. Take control of your future and move forward in your divorce with confidence and composure. So whether you're the parent that had the inkling or you're the parent who is shocked by this, your world is basic, I would imagine, because I've never been in this situation, but I would imagine your world is really shaken because the one thing you thought you knew about your child was their gender. And now that's not the case anymore. So what did you do, or what should parents do to deal with their own issues and do what's best for their child? You've said some of these things, but I don't know. It sounds like you really have to take care of yourself too. And is there, is it therapy? Is it, you said support groups? Like what's the best way to maintain take care of yourself and take care of your child? Because you both need care right now.
Absolutely. And it's a great question to lay out too in detail. And I think first, always holding first, how do I show up for my child and what is my child needing? And some of the information about how to do that you can get so there are therapists who specialize in this and can help, coaches, and there are wonderful support groups. I lead a support group for an organization called Stand With Trans. There are also others. There's Transparent and PFLAG are some of the more well-known ones. They are online. You can sign up and you can talk to and bring your questions, your doubts, your concerns to the group. And you will likely hear similar things from other parents. So you don't feel so alone, because being transgender people are a very small part of the population. So having a transgender child, I'm in New York City, so I do know other people who have transgender children, but in a lot of parts of the country, you may not. So being able to connect with other parents and get that support is so, so helpful. There are also some really good books, a couple of really good books that I recommend, and I can put links, I can send you that information. They're really good starting points, and they're written by therapists, and they have the question, is this a phase? Like some of the common questions you hear, they have that directly and they answer it directly. So I find that really helpful also. And as I mentioned, therapists can also be helpful if you're really struggling with your own feelings and emotions around it. And I do want to acknowledge, for a lot of parents, and especially today, where the national conversation is about, do we ban gender affirming care for people under the age of 18. So it's there. A lot of parents do have a protective instinct, and so they may react in a way of, I don't want you to use your preferred name, or I don't want you to use your pronouns at school, and whether or not that's even an option is another question we can talk about. But that there is a protective instinct that is very understandable. And what I say, sometimes people say things like that to their child out of, I want to protect you, but the child might interpret it as rejecting. And so that's another opportunity for repair, or even explanation of, I'm afraid and I'm trying to protect you. And so even it, just so the child is understanding, it's not me, they're, they're not rejecting me. Because again, this is such a vulnerable population. I mean, we see this population of people have really high rates of suicide attempts and suicidal ideation, depression and anxiety. So everything we can do to support them is just what I'm trying to share. And again, parents aren't perfect. So how do we all work together to support the whole family?
Right. And anything more that you would want people to know if they have to co-parent and make decisions about medical care, hormones, gender affirming care, any medical interventions? I assume you need both parents, if the child's under 18, to approve of this. How do you help parents have this conversation in mediation with, are the doctors involved, or what? How do you suggest, what do you do to help people in this situation?
Yeah, and the first thing I would say, even before we get to the conversation, is it's so important to know what is happening in your particular state and locality. So right now in 24 states, there are laws banning gender affirming care, and then other what we call anti-trans laws. So that is going to set the stage to begin with for what conversations, how do we have these conversations? I working with a mediator who's a therapist, or and it doesn't, so it can be for divorcing parents. The one thing about parents who are divorcing is, as hard as it is to trying to navigate all of this at once, divorce does provide a structure and an opportunity for conversations that sometimes outside of that process and structure, it can actually almost be harder for parents to have sometimes. So there is that structure, and there are people who can help you prepare for conversations and have the conversation. So that, like, coaches, therapists, and attorneys can help you prepare, and then mediators, attorneys can help you have the conversation. If you're in what state you're in. So if you're in a situation where you're an affirming parent and the other parent is non-affirming and is not, it seems pretty rigidly fixed in that position, at least for now, really talking to an attorney and understanding what are likely outcomes in your area. You would really want to know that ahead of time and think about, okay, what are my positions? What's best for my child and why? So you can articulate them to your attorney, the mediator, your other parent, if you're in court, to the judge. It's really important to know. And then what are the likely outcomes? Because if you're in a state, for example, that, like in Idaho, it's a felony to provide gender affirming care. There are statutes. I don't know if they're in effect. There are a lot of statutes that are effective but are subject to litigation. But how that might go in that state is very different from if you're in New York City, where we have laws protecting access to gender affirming care. So thinking about what would a judge do? Judges across the state apply what we call the best interest of the child standard, but what a judge in New York thinks that is and what a judge in Idaho thinks that is might be very different. So knowing that is really important ahead of time, and then that informs, do we stay at the negotiating table, or does it make sense to go to court? I think if parents can work it out between themselves, that's always the best, but that isn't always an option. So yeah.
Have you seen parents who get aligned that the child needs care move to a gender affirming state or more? Uh,
Yes.
yes?
Yes.
Together? Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of conversation about it. It's also a bit. There was a case in Texas where it was I don't remember their names, but it's a very high conflict divorce, and the father was very against gender affirming care. And the other issue that comes up in divorce is relocation, and it's you have to get court approval to move with the children somewhere else. So that because he was very against it, that was very challenging. And the last I heard of this case, the mother was permitted to move to California, but on the condition that she agreed not to seek gender affirming care for their kids. So it's tough that because courts have have an interest in keeping families close enough so that both parents have parenting time. So that's another piece that can come up and and impact what's happening in the proceeding. So when in a situation like that, the focus that I think about is really what can you do, and doing your best and being the supportive parent you are, whatever that looks like and how you can do it, which is also challenging in a lot of those states. But I'm hearing a lot of people talking about who have moved or who are really thinking about moving. New York and Vermont and California are very popular. Yeah.
Right. Destinations at
Yeah.
this point.
Yeah.
It's so interesting and these kids, they didn't choose where to be born or how to be born and they just want to feel okay in their bodies and that's but it's not easy, and I appreciate the journey that you've been on.
Thank you.
I imagine it hasn't always been straightforward and linear, and you're learning still as you go. How's your daughter today?
She's great, and I'm glad you asked that question too. Is the other thing that I talk about too is remembering there's so much to focus on that's negative, especially right now. But there's also a lot of joy and a lot of positives. Supporting your child in watching them become themselves and have that freedom and space to be supported and become the person they are really is a beautiful thing. And our bond, I mean, I feel like I've always had a really strong bond with my daughter, but I really feel like it's really deepened, and she knows that not everyone lives in an affirming state or has affirming parents, and it means a lot, and there's truly a lot of joy in that.
So happy to hear this. So she's grateful for the two of you. You're grateful that she's healthy and thriving,
Yeah.
and I'm very happy for
Yeah.
the ending where you are right now in the journey. At least that's wonderful.
Yeah. Thank
Oh,
you.
well, thank you, Emily. Anything else you wanted to share on this topic before we bring this episode to a close? Anything I didn't ask you that you think is important to know?
No, I think we hit the really important points. I do have a tip that
Yes.
for people who are talking about going through the divorce. One of the topics we often talk about is guardianship, and I who will take care of your child if you're unavailable, which we don't like to think about, but it is important to think about. And in the context of having a transgender child, I always suggest thinking about who and where. And so who is the person you might have designated before, is that person going to support your child and their gender identity? Will they continue to have access to gender affirming care through that person? And then the where where do they live? I mean, my people are in Missouri, and so my child is over 18 now, so it isn't an issue for us. But that would be a problem if she was still under 18, because she wouldn't have access to gender affirming care there. So these are some other things to think about. And like I said, 24 states in the country right now have laws banning gender affirming care. 16 have what we call shield laws that protect access to gender affirming care. So those are some things to think about. And actually, I'll send another link. There's a site called the Movement Advancement Project, and they have real-time, up-to-date information on what's happening in each state. So that's a great place for parents to start. And if you're thinking about moving, or if there's a conversation about getting a new job somewhere, or guardianship, anything like that, it's a great resource to have, to know what's happening there and what potential issues might you face.
Great. Thank you for that tip. Or it's a better divorce tip, or it's even if you're in an intact, couple, just choosing guardians for your children and making sure that the guardians are living or respect the child's gender identity, and the state will support it as well. So great tip. So Emily, how can people find you, reach out to you? What's the best way?
Yeah, so the best way is to find me on LinkedIn under Emily Malloy. My website is in progress right now, so that will be up soon, and there'll be a link there. Or you can email me at emily@emilymalloymediation.com.
Okay. Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you, Andrea. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about this. It's a topic that's very important to me, obviously. So.
It is, and it was wonderful to have you here because it is so deeply felt and lived, and I appreciate everything you had to share.
Thank you.
So if you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe. This will help others who are seeking a better divorce to find us. This has been another episode of A Better Divorce Podcast, and we'll see you on the next episode. You've been tuning in to another episode of A Better Divorce Podcast with Andrea Vacca. Thank you for subscribing, leaving your positive comments and reviews, and sharing the show with others. You can watch episodes at vaccalaw.com, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And you can listen through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. Bye for now, and remember, you can have a better divorce.